Before there were empires, before there were legends, there was the ocean, cold, endless, merciless, and from its frozen shores rose the most extraordinary civilization the medieval world had ever seen. This is the Viking Age. Cast your mind back over 1,000 years. The world is dark and cold and vast. There are no maps for most of the ocean. There are no instruments to guide a ship through an Atlantic storm. There is only the wind, the stars, and the courage of the men willing to face both. These are the people we call Vikings, and almost everything you think you know about them is wrong. Long before the first longship ever touched open water, the land itself shaped the people. Ancient Scandinavia was a world of dense pine forests stretching endlessly to the horizon. Frozen lakes reflecting pale winter skies, a jagged coastline where the sea never truly let you go. The ocean was not an obstacle to these people. It was a road. For generations before the age began, Iron Age Scandinavians lived in small coastal settlements, pulling fish from dark cold waters, hammering iron over outdoor forges in muddy villages, weaving rough wool by firelight inside thatched longhouses. Life was hard. Life was short. But it was also rich with meaning, with craft, with community, and with a restless, burning curiosity about what lay beyond the horizon. Rune stones stood silent in snow-dusted fields. Ancient petroglyphs carved into smooth rock told stories of ships, and deer, and men. And the northern lights danced overhead like messages from another world. These were a people who believed the gods were watching, who believed that how you lived and how you died mattered deeply, who believed that the greatest shame was not death, but a life lived without courage. Then, sometime in the late 8th century, something changed. The Norse people had always been skilled with wood and iron, but they turned those skills toward a single, magnificent obsession. The ship, not just any ship, but a vessel so perfectly engineered, so breathtakingly designed, that modern naval architects still marvel at it today. The Viking longship, clinker-built from overlapping oak planks, riveted with iron every few inches, flexible enough to bend with ocean waves rather than break against them, shallow enough to navigate rivers that no deep-hulled vessel could enter, and fast enough to outrun almost anything on the water. It was the most advanced maritime technology of its age, and it changed history. It all began in the forest. A master shipwright walking among ancient oaks, studying each trunk for grain and natural curve, knowing that every great ship started here, long before the first plank was cut. Teams of craftsmen spent months assembling these vessels, fitting plank to plank with extraordinary precision, pressing pine tar caulking into every seam, until the hull was as tight and strong as the men who would sail her. Inside a completed longship, rows of oar benches stretched from stern to bow. Painted shields hung along the gunwale. A massive striped sail of red and white waited to catch the wind. The dragon prow rose fierce and proud at the front, carved with such skill and passion that sailors believed it carried a spirit of its own. When that completed ship finally entered the water for the first time, the entire community gathered on the shore, because they knew that ship was not just timber and iron. It was freedom. But who were these people who built such things? The word Viking is commonly misunderstood. It was not a race. It was not even a nationality. Viking was a job description. It meant someone who went on a sea voyage. Most Norse people were never Vikings in that sense at all. Most Norse people were never raiders. They were farmers, plowing fields behind ox-drawn plows on green rolling hills, harvesting grain in golden autumn fields, storing food through long brutal winters. They were craftsmen, blacksmiths hammering iron plowshares, silversmiths working impossibly fine filigree onto silver brooches with tiny hammers and chisels, jewelers casting intricate bronze animal figurines in clay molds, woodcarvers creating intertwined serpents and beasts of breathtaking beauty on every surface they touched. They were traders, weighing silver on portable scales at busy marketplaces, exchanging furs and amber for silk from Byzantium and spices from the East. Arabic coins, Byzantine glass, Frankish wine, all found their way into Norse hands not through raiding, but through commerce. The great trading cities of Hedeby, Birka, and Koppang were cosmopolitan international hubs, where Norse, Slavic, Frankish, and Arabic merchants bargained side by side in the mud. They were poets, skalds reciting intricate verses in firelit halls while warriors listened with raised horn cups, honoring the deeds of the living and the memory of the dead. They were storytellers, keeping entire histories alive in their memories, passing sagas from generation to generation without a single word written down. They were lawmakers. At the Thing, free Norse men gathered in outdoor assemblies on windswept hillsides, where chieftains spoke from raised stones and every free man had a voice. Disputes were settled through debate and law, not just through violence. This was Viking democracy centuries before it had a name. Inside the Longhouse, Viking women held extraordinary authority. A set of keys at a woman's belt was not decoration. It was power. It meant she controlled the household, directed the workers, managed the food stores, ran the farm when the men were gone for months at sea, and made every decision that kept the family alive through brutal Scandinavian winters. Norse law gave women rights that women in many other parts of medieval Europe would not see for another 5 centuries. Norse children played in muddy yards with wooden toys, learned to read runes scratched into birch bark by firelight, and grew up in a culture that valued courage, loyalty, craftsmanship, and the telling of stories above almost everything else. Even in leisure, the Norse showed sophistication. They played Nefadaful, a strategic board game of remarkable complexity. They bathed regularly in smoke saunas by lakesides, a practice so ingrained in Scandinavian culture that it survives unchanged to this day. They brewed mead from honey and wild herbs. They held longboat racing competitions on summer fjords. And they celebrated Yule, the winter solstice, with enormous bonfires and feasting and song, filling the longest, darkest night of the year with light and warmth and community. But it was the sea that defined them above all else. A Viking navigator standing at the prow of a longship, shielding weathered eyes against bright ocean light, could read the stars, the waves, the color of the water, and the flight of birds to find his way across open ocean without a single instrument. They used carved wooden sun compasses to track position by shadow. They held carved whale bone tools up to the North Star at night. They read the swell patterns of the ocean the way a scholar reads a page. And they developed an almost supernatural instinct over generations of seafaring that allowed them to cross the open Atlantic and arrive exactly where they intended. These skills would take them farther than any Europeans had ever gone. And so the raids began. In 793 AD, 3 longships emerged from the morning fog off the coast of a small holy island in northern England. The monks of Lindisfarne had never seen anything like it. Dark hulls, dragon prows, iron-helmeted figures moving fast across the beach. By the time the sun rose fully, it was over. Treasure gone, brothers gone, the monastery half destroyed, and a message burned into the consciousness of every Christian kingdom in Europe. From the north, they come. For the next 250 years, the coasts of Britain, Ireland, France, and beyond lived in fear of that silhouette on the horizon. The dragon prow cutting through morning mist. Shields raised along the gunwale. The rhythmic splash of 20 oars growing louder. Viking warriors were formidable fighters. Shield walls, formed by men standing shoulder to shoulder with overlapping round shields and spears bristling outward above them, were nearly impossible to break without enormous cost. The legendary Berserkers, enormous men in bear-skin cloaks, working themselves into a battle trance with no armor and an axe in each hand, were the terror of every battlefield they entered. But the raids were never just about violence. The Norse were calculating strategists. Viking chieftains studied coastal maps by torchlight on their ships at night, identifying targets, planning approaches, timing arrivals to coincide with the lowest tides and the thinnest defenses. They used the rivers of Europe to penetrate deep into the interior, beaching their shallow-hulled longships on riverbanks hundreds of miles inland, in places no enemy believed any fleet could possibly reach. They laid siege to Paris. They circled Constantinople. They sold captives into the great slave markets of the medieval world. And when European kings could not defeat them, they paid them instead. Silver tribute. Enormous amounts of silver just to make the raiders go away. Sometimes it worked, often it did not, because the Norse had realized something far more valuable than silver: land. Rich, green, farmable land. In England, Norse settlers carved out an entire kingdom called the Danelaw, ruling over half the country for generations, stamping their language and their place names so deeply into the English landscape that they are still visible today. In France, a Viking chieftain accepted a treaty, converted to Christianity, and was given the territory that would become Normandy, the land of the Northmen. In Ireland, Norse settlers founded the city of Dublin on the banks of the River Liffey, transforming a simple river crossing into one of the great trading cities of the medieval world. Norse craftsmen and Irish artisans worked side by side in workshops, creating a fusion culture whose artistic legacy still survives today. But even all of that was not enough for Norse curiosity. Some looked further west, much further. Norse sailors island-hopped across the North Atlantic using natural stepping stones of land. The Orkney Islands, the Shetlands, then the Faroe Islands emerging from morning mist, their green cliffs crowded with puffins. Then Iceland rising from the sea like a dream of another world, a volcanic landscape of alien beauty, geothermal steam rising from black earth, mountains of ice and rivers of frozen lava. The first Norse settlers arrived on Iceland's black sand beaches with longships loaded with livestock, timber, and tools. They stayed, and in doing so, they created something remarkable. Around 930 AD, the Norse settlers of Iceland gathered at a place called Thingvellir, a dramatic rift valley in the volcanic rock, and established the Althing, the world's first parliament. Free men debating law in the open air of a new world. Europe would not see anything like it again for centuries. But even Iceland was not the edge of the world. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, sailed further west and found a vast new land. He called it Greenland to make it sound appealing. Small communities of Norse settlers built turf longhouses in the green fjord valleys of Greenland's southern coast, surrounded by mountains of ice, impossibly far from home, clinging to existence at the very edge of the known world. And then his son, Leif Erikson, sailed further still. Around the year 1000 AD, 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus set sail, Norse explorers waded ashore on the coast of North America. They called it Vinland, the land of wine. The physical evidence still exists. At a place called L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, reconstructed Norse turf longhouses sit on a coastal bluff overlooking the same cold gray ocean the explorers crossed. The first Europeans in the Americas were Vikings, but exploration was not the only direction the Norse traveled. While some sailed west into the unknown, others went east. Along the great rivers of Russia, Norse Varangian warriors paddled longships down the Volga and the Dnieper, threading through endless Russian forest, trading furs and amber for the extraordinary wealth of the Islamic world. Arabic silver coins poured by the thousands into Scandinavian hands. Norse traders reached the Caspian Sea, the Silk Road, and finally Constantinople, the most magnificent city in the medieval world. Norse warriors who reached Constantinople were so impressive, so formidable, that the Byzantine emperor recruited them as his personal bodyguard. The Varangian Guard, tall Norse men in Eastern Byzantine armor standing beside Greek courtiers, axes on their shoulders, guarding the emperor of the known world. The Viking Age was not an age of mindless savagery. It was an age of extraordinary human achievement. Seafaring that defied belief, art and craftsmanship of breathtaking beauty, law and governance centuries ahead of their time. A mythology of gods and giants and cosmic struggle that still resonates 1,000 years later. Odin, the ancient one-eyed king of gods, wise and terrible, 2 ravens on his shoulders, a runic spear in his hand, wandering the worlds in disguise, always seeking knowledge, always paying a price. Thor, the red-bearded thunder god, raising Mjolnir to storm-split skies, protector of mankind, beloved by farmers and warriors alike. Loki, lean and clever, flames dancing in his dark eyes, the agent of chaos who served both the gods and their enemies, and whose final betrayal would set the end of the world in motion. Valhalla, the golden hall where fallen warriors feasted for eternity, drinking mead from the horns of goats, fighting and feasting and fighting again, preparing for the final battle at the end of all things. The Valkyries, riding winged horses through curtains of northern lights, choosing who would die with honor on the battlefield, carrying the worthy dead home to Odin's hall. And Ragnarok, the prophesied end of all things, when the world serpent rises from the sea, when the sky fractures, when even the gods themselves fall. These were not just stories. They were a complete vision of the universe, a way of making sense of the cold, the darkness, the ocean, and the silence. Norse spiritual life was rich and serious. Carved wooden altars received offerings of fruit and wheat and precious objects. The Volva, a female seeress of great power, could enter a deep trance state and speak the future, and her words were law. Runic symbols painted on shields before battle were believed to carry genuine divine protection. The raven, sacred to Odin, circled overhead as a sign of divine guidance on long ocean voyages. And in death, the greatest Norse warriors were placed in their longships, surrounded by everything they had valued in life, weapons and treasures and horses and hounds, and sent into the afterlife on a vessel of flame upon dark water, because a great warrior deserved to arrive at Valhalla in a great ship. Then, slowly, something began to change. Christian missionaries moved through Scandinavia with purpose and patience. Norse chieftains made pragmatic conversions, exchanging Thor's hammer pendants for crosses when it secured them land and political alliances and trading access. The great outdoor temples fell quiet. The blot ceremonies ended. The old gods retreated from daily life into poetry and story. In Iceland, scholars began writing it all down. The Prose Edda, the Icelandic sagas, the Eddic poems. Everything that had been carried in memory and oral tradition for centuries was committed to vellum by candlelight in cold timber scriptoriums. Because of those writers, we still know the names of Odin and Thor and Freya today. The Viking Age officially ended in 1066. In that single extraordinary year, the last great Norse invasion of England was defeated at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the old world ending on a muddy northern bridge in a desperate final stand. Just days later, the Norman invasion fleet crossed the English Channel. The Normans, descendants of Norse Vikings who had settled in France 2 centuries earlier, their dragon ships barely changed from the original longships, their commanders still bearing Norse names, crossing the same gray water their ancestors had crossed to raid, now crossing it to conquer. The irony was perfect. England was not conquered by Vikings. It was conquered by the grandchildren of Vikings. The age was over. But the legacy never ended. Look at the days of the week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, named for Tyr, Odin, Thor, and Freya. Norse gods hidden in plain sight in every language descended from English, spoken by billions of people every single day without a moment's thought. Look at the map of northern England. Places ending in by, Thorpe, Gate, Wick. Everyone a ghost of a Norse settlement 1,000 years gone, still whispering a name in an ancient language. Look at the genetic maps of Europe. Scandinavian DNA spread across Britain, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and Russia. The biological footprint of an age that changed the world permanently. The Greenland settlements eventually failed. The climate shifted, growing colder over generations. Trade routes dried up. Contact with Iceland and Europe grew more infrequent. The last Norse Greenlanders vanished sometime in the 15th century. Their turf longhouses collapsed slowly under winter snow. Their fields returned to tundra. Silence reclaimed everything. A ghost civilization at the edge of the world that simply, quietly ceased to be. But in Iceland, the descendants of the first settlers still speak a language almost unchanged from the Norse of 1,000 years ago. Still read the sagas aloud in the original tongue. Still carry the names of the gods embedded in their surnames. And in Norway, a modern replica longship sails the same fjords under bright sunshine, crewed by people who understand exactly what their ancestors built and why. The same lines, the same sail, the same extraordinary marriage of beauty and function that has never truly been improved upon. In museums in Oslo, Actual Viking ships rise from the earth where they lay buried for over 1,000 years. Preserved by the dark soil of ancient burial mounds, their carved prows still fierce, their oak planks still tight, silent witnesses to an age of impossible human achievement. Runestones still stand on Swedish hillsides in their original positions, where someone placed them 1,000 years ago to remember someone they loved. Their carved serpents and runic text still legible, after 10 centuries of wind and rain and ice. Messages from the dead, still speaking. The Norse people did not see themselves as conquerors. They saw themselves as explorers, as traders, as farmers, as poets, as believers in gods who demanded courage above all else. They crossed oceans that no one believed could be crossed. They built cities in places no one believed could be inhabited. They wrote laws when the rest of Europe was still settling disputes with blood. They reached North America 5 full centuries before anyone in the known world believed such a place existed. And then, one by one, the longships were pulled ashore for the last time. The sails were furled. The oars were shipped. Grass grew slowly around the keels. The carved dragon prows stared out at oceans they would never cross again. And the great age of the Norse, quietly, magnificently, faded into legend. But legends do not die. As long as there is an ocean on the horizon, and someone brave enough to wonder what lies beyond it, the spirit of the Viking Age lives on.